Hello, my friend. The world of magic, filled with legends and ancient tales, is opening its gates once again. Tonight, in the Gryffindor dormitory by the crackling fireplace, I will share another story with my friends. Join us, for the magic is about to come alive.
The fire in the Gryffindor common room burned low, casting long, sleepy shadows over the stone walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the castle towers, carrying the faint hoot of an owl and the faraway toll of the clock in the astronomy tower. It was well past curfew, and most students had gone to bed. Only one remained awake, a thin boy with sandy hair and a habit of sitting where the firelight faded into darkness. His name was Evan Tallow. He was neither brave like Harry Potter, nor clever like Hermione Granger. He didn't play Quidditch, didn't cause mischief, and had never once been caught sneaking to the kitchens. If you asked anyone in Gryffindor who he was, they might frown and say, "Oh, the quiet one who sits by the window?" That was Evan. Quiet, polite, and almost invisible. He'd been sorted into Gryffindor 4 years ago, but he sometimes wondered whether the hat had made a mistake. Courage wasn't something he felt. Often, most days he kept to the edges of things. The back row in class, the far corner of the library, the end of the dining table. The noise and laughter of Gryffindor Tower often made him feel like he was standing outside in the cold, looking through a window at a world that wasn't his. That night, the common room was nearly empty. A few embers glowed faintly on the hearth. Evan sat in his usual chair, his eyes wandering over the framed portraits that lined the walls. The painted faces were mostly asleep except for one, a stern witch in crimson robes, who watched him with mild curiosity. "Still awake, young man?" she asked, her painted voice echoing softly. Evan startled a little. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. The portrait gave a knowing nod. "Too many thoughts, That's how trouble starts at Hogwarts. The castle listens, you know. It hears the restless ones." Evan frowned, unsure whether she was joking. But before he could ask, the portrait yawned and drifted. The fire cracked once and the room grew quiet again. He sighed. Tomorrow was another day. Defense against the dark arts, with Professor Umbridge. He dreaded it, not just the class, but the way she smiled. That sweet, poisonous smile that made even brave Gryffindors uneasy. Evan stood to go to bed, but something caught his eye. In the far corner of the room, behind an armchair, a faint shimmer moved along the wall, like moonlight caught in glass. It wasn't there before. Curious, he stepped closer. The shimmer deepened, revealing a mirror, tall with an arched frame of gold, its surface rippling faintly, as if touched by water. Evan blinked. He didn't remember seeing it there earlier. The Gryffindor common room hadn't changed in years. He glanced around. No one else seemed to notice it. Carefully, he stepped closer. The mirror's surface cleared, and he saw his reflection. Tired eyes, rumpled robes, a bit of soot on his sleeve. But then something strange happened. The reflection smiled at him. Not just a natural mirrored smile. This one moved first, independent of him. The reflected Evan leaned forward slightly, as if greeting an old friend. Evan's breath caught. He stepped back. The reflection copied the movement now, delayed by a heartbeat. "What?" he whispered. The glass shimmered again. Words appeared along the frame, carved faintly in gold. "To those who feel unseen, I see you." Evan felt a shiver crawl up his neck. He looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and laugh. But the room was still. Only the fire whispered. He turned back to the mirror. His reflection now stood surrounded by familiar faces. Harry, Hermione, Ron, even Neville, all smiling warmly at him, clapping him on the shoulder, laughing as though he were part of their world. Evan's throat tightened. The image looked so real. He reached out, and for a fleeting instant, then the mirror's surface rippled again, and everything vanished, leaving only his own startled face. He stumbled back, heart racing. "It's just a charm," he muttered to himself, "a trick of the light." But as he turned toward the stairs, he thought he heard something behind him. A whisper, faint as the wind. "Come back, Evan." He froze. The whisper came again, this time clearer. "Don't go. I can show you everything you want." Evan spun around, but the mirror stood silent and still. He backed away slowly, his pulse thudding in his ears. Finally, he turned and hurried up the stairs to the dormitory. The other boys were asleep. One of them snored softly. Evan climbed into bed, pulling the blanket tight. For a long time he stared at the red canopy above him, trying to convince himself he'd imagined it. But somewhere below, in the dim common room, the mirror's surface rippled once more. And for just a moment, a face appeared within the glass. Not Evan's reflection this time, but a shadow with golden eyes and a faint, knowing smile. "Welcome home," it whispered to the empty room. And then the mirror grew still again, waiting for the lonely student to return. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Gryffindor dormitory, tracing golden patterns across the crimson hangings. The sound of chattering voices drifted up from the common room, mingled with the crackle of a newly kindled fire. Evan Tallow sat on the edge of his bed, still in his pajamas, staring at the floor. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the mirror, saw his reflection smiling back at him, saw those golden words gleaming faintly on the frame. When the others finally rose, Dean, Seamus, and Neville, Evan pretended to rummage for his books. Seamus was telling a story about a misfired spell that had turned his quill into a frog. The others laughed. Evan smiled faintly but said nothing. The thought came to him quietly. Maybe I dreamed it. Hogwarts was full of odd things after all. Suits of armor that whistled, staircases that shifted, portraits that argued with each other. But the longer he tried to convince himself, the more clearly he remembered the mirror's whisper, soft, pleading, unmistakably real. He couldn't leave it alone. When he descended to the common room, the place was empty. The fire burned bright, casting a warm glow across the scarlet rugs and gold-trimmed furniture. He glanced to the far corner, half hoping, half fearing what he'd find. The mirror was there. It stood as though it had always been part of the room. Tall, elegant, its frame engraved with curling vines of gold. Its surface was clear now, reflecting the cozy interior perfectly. Evan felt a flutter of both dread and wonder. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Who are you?" The reflection did not answer, only watched him with the same weary eyes. He waited a moment longer, then sighed. Perhaps it truly had been a trick. He turned to leave. Then, "Evan." The voice came like a breath against his ear. He spun around. His reflection was gone. In its place stood a young man draped in deep crimson robes, his golden hair falling past his shoulders. His eyes glowed faintly, the color of candlelight caught in amber. "Do not be afraid. the stranger said, his voice calm and steady. I have waited a long time to be seen. Evan stepped back, heart pounding. You're inside the mirror. The man inclined his head. A reflection of what once was. Call me Alden. Evan could barely speak. How do you know my name? Alden's smile was faint, wistful. Because we are alike, you and I. You feel it, don't you? That sense of standing apart, of being unseen by those around you. Evan said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Alden's image seemed to soften. I once walked these same halls. I was a student of Gryffindor, the very first House of Courage. But even among lions, some are left in the shadows. Evan's breath caught. You were a student here? Aye, Alden said, an apprentice of Godric Gryffindor himself. Evan stared at him, unsure whether to believe. That's impossible. That was 1,000 years ago. Alden chuckled softly. Time is not what it seems in this castle. Hogwarts remembers, and so do I. The words hung heavy in the air. Evan's fear ebbed, replaced by curiosity. Why are you in the mirror? The smile faded from Alden's face. Because I sought what was never freely given. Friendship. Recognition. I longed for my name to be remembered. And in that longing, I betrayed the trust of my house. Godric sealed me here so that I might learn humility and wait until someone could free me. Evan frowned. Free you? How? Alden's eyes gleamed brighter. You already have? You saw me, you heard me. That is the first step. But I am still weak, bound by the silence of centuries. I need connection, the strength that comes from another heart. Evan hesitated. You mean me? Only for a while, Alden said gently. You are not alone, Evan, and I can help you. Would you not like your friends to see you? To truly see you? The words struck deep. He imagined walking into the common room to smiles and greetings, imagined Harry nodding to him in class, Hermione asking his opinion, Ron inviting him to sit by the fire. It felt like sunlight after a long winter. What must I do? He asked. Alden's expression warmed. Nothing difficult. Return each night. Speak with me. Let me share with you what I remember of this castle, its hidden doors, its ancient magic. Together we may restore what has been lost. Evan nodded slowly. It sounded harmless enough. And so that night, when the tower slept and the moon hung high over the forbidden forest, Evan crept once more into the common room. The fire had burned. The mirror glowed faintly in the dark, as though aware of his coming. Alden was waiting. For nights thereafter, Evan returned. They spoke in whispers about things long forgotten, secret passages between the towers, spells taught by Godric himself, the hidden relics buried in the foundations of Hogwarts. Evan began to feel different, stronger, surer of himself. In class, he raised his hand more often. He smiled when others spoke to him, but with each passing night, something changed in the mirror. The light within it grew darker, richer, almost alive. Alden's eyes seemed to gleam brighter, his smile more intense. One evening, Evan noticed something strange. When Alden smiled, his reflection smiled too, even before he did. Is something wrong? Evan asked. Nothing, Alden said, though his tone had sharpened slightly. You're becoming who you were meant to be. The others are beginning to notice, aren't they? Evan thought of Seamus laughing with him that morning, of Neville asking for help with herbology. He nodded. Yes, they're kinder lately. Good, Alden murmured. It has begun. What has? But Alden only smiled again. You will see soon enough." As Evan turned to leave, the mirror flickered just once, and for the briefest instant, he saw not his reflection, but dozens of faint, ghostly faces pressed against the glass. Some looked sorrowful, others angry. All whispered soundlessly as Alden's voice called softly, "Tomorrow, Evan. Return tomorrow." When Evan climbed into bed that night, the firelight still played in his mind, and deep within the mirror, Alden's golden eyes burned like embers waiting to be fed. Days passed, and the strange rhythm of Evan Tallow's life continued. He went to class, studied quietly, and spoke when spoken to. But each night, when the rest of Gryffindor Tower slept, he returned to the mirror. It had become a secret he guarded fiercely. A strange comfort, a sense of being seen, of mattering at last. Alden's voice filled the empty common room like music. He spoke of the castle's earliest days, of the founder's magic woven into the stones. He told tales of duels fought in torchlit halls, of enchanted beasts that once guarded the towers, and of hidden chambers sealed by spells so old they had no names. Evan listened, enraptured. He began to think of Alden as a friend, perhaps the first he had ever truly had. When he spoke of his loneliness, Alden listened with patient understanding. When he doubted himself, Alden's voice grew fierce, reminding him of his house's courage. "A lion does not wait to be invited to roar," he once said, his eyes gleaming. And yet a shadow hung beneath the warmth of their conversations. Evan noticed that the mirror had begun to hum faintly whenever he drew near, a low vibration like distant thunder. The air grew cooler around it, and sometimes the fire in the hearth dimmed when Alden spoke. He told himself it was nothing. Magic always had strange side effects. Still, he felt uneasy when he caught his reflection behaving oddly, lagging behind his movements or smiling after his own face had turned solemn. One night, as the castle slept under a drifting snow, Alden spoke of a chamber beneath Gryffindor Tower, a place forgotten even by the headmaster himself. "It was built by Godric's own hand," Alden said softly. "A vault of secrets meant for the bravest of his line. I helped him craft it, though I was not meant to enter. Inside lies a relic, the Ember Heartstone, forged from the flame that once burned in the founder's hearth." Evan's heart quickened. "A relic? Like the sword of Gryffindor?" "Older," said Alden, "purer. It holds courage itself, the essence of Gryffindor's magic, and it belongs to one who proves worthy. You could be that one, Evan." "But how would I find it?" Alden's reflection leaned closer, his golden eyes glowing. "The path lies through the mirror. I can show you when the time is right. For now, listen and prepare." That night, Evan dreamed of fire, great crimson flames roaring through endless corridors. Within the fire stood Alden, smiling, his hand outstretched. The next morning, Hogwarts felt different. Whispers followed Evan in the corridors. Soft at first, then louder. "Did you hear what he said to Umbridge?" one Hufflepuff murmured. "I heard he stood up to her. Said she was a coward hiding behind parchment." It wasn't true. At least not exactly. Evan had spoken out in class, yes, when Umbridge mocked Professor Lupin's name. But the words had come unbidden, burning from his tongue like fire. The class had stared at him in astonishment. Even Professor Umbridge momentarily speechless. After that, things began to change. People noticed him. Neville waved in the halls. Ginny Weasley smiled when he passed. For the first time in his life, Evan felt seen. That evening when he returned to the common room, the mirror seemed to blaze with light. Alden stood within, smiling proudly. You see, courage awakens when it is recognized. They will follow you now. Evan smiled, though unease stirred beneath his pride. You said something about proving myself, about the Emberheart Stone. How? Alden's smile deepened. Soon. But courage is not given, it is forged. You will need to face your fear, Evan. The fear of being nothing. Are you ready? He hesitated. I think so. Good. Then tomorrow return after the lights go out. Bring your wand and trust me. The next day passed in a blur. Evan's mind burned with anticipation. He barely tasted his dinner, barely noticed Hermione frowning as she passed him in the corridor. That night, long after the tower had gone silent, he crept once more down the stairs. The common room was bathed. The fire had burned out entirely, yet the mirror glowed faintly as though lit from within. Alden was waiting, his eyes bright and intent. It is time, he said softly. Touch the glass. Evan hesitated. Will it hurt? Alden smiled. Only for a moment. Then you will see as I see. Evan raised a trembling hand. The glass felt cool at first, then warm, almost pulsing. His reflection shimmered, wavered, and before he could draw a breath, the surface gave way like liquid. He gasped and was pulled through. He landed hard on stone. The air was thick and cool, filled with the scent of earth and dust. Dim torches flared to life, revealing a narrow passageway carved from red stone. The walls shimmered faintly, inscribed with runes that pulsed like fading embers. He turned, and there stood Alden, no longer a reflection but real, solid, his crimson robes brushing the floor. Evan stared in wonder. I'm here. Alden inclined his head. The Vault of the Lion. You stand where few have walked. They moved through the passage, the air humming with power. Strange whispers echoed faintly, not words, but the sigh of ancient magic. At last they came to a vast chamber. At its center stood a pedestal of black stone upon which burned a single flame, small yet impossibly bright. It cast no shadow. The Emberheart, Alden said reverently. The living fire of Gryffindor. Evan stepped forward, heart pounding. The flame's light reached toward him, almost as if it recognized him. Touch it, Alden whispered. But something in the man's voice had changed. Colder now, more commanding. Evan hesitated. What will it do? It will make you strong, Alden said. It will make them all see you. The light flared, and for an instant Evan thought he saw faces flickering within the fire, dozens of them, ghostly and pained. He took a step back. Alden, he said slowly, you said you were bound for betrayal. What if... Touch it. His golden eyes burned brighter, his face twisting in desperation. Do it now before it fades. Evan's fear returned full force. You're using me. Alden's smile returned, thin, cruel. And you are using me, Evan Tallow. You wanted to be seen. This is the price. The chamber trembled. The fire roared higher, spilling golden light across the walls. Evan raised his wand. Get back. Alden's laughter echoed through the chamber, cold and hollow. You cannot fight what you are, boy. You called me forth. And now you will finish what I began. The torches flared. The flames surged toward him. Evan stumbled backward, shielding his face, and then, with a flash of desperate courage, he aimed his wand at the mirror's faint outline behind Alden and shouted, Finite incantatum. The spell struck true. The mirror cracked with a sound like shattering ice. Alden screamed, a terrible echoing cry that filled the chamber and was pulled backward in a rush of light. The fire died instantly. When the glow faded, Evan stood alone, trembling, surrounded by silence and dust. The mirror lay broken beside him, its surface dark and lifeless. He stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "You were wrong. I don't need to be seen to be real." Somewhere far above, the clock in the tower struck midnight. Evan turned and made his way back through the dark passage, the faintest ember of courage flickering in his chest. A light that, though small, was truly his own. The next morning dawned gray and silent, the kind of morning when even the castle seemed to hold its breath. Snow fell steadily outside the high windows, veiling the towers and turrets in white. The Gryffindor common room was quiet. The fire burned low, and the portraits along the walls whispered softly among themselves. Evan Tallow sat motionless in one of the old armchairs, staring into the embers. His robes were dusted with soot. No one else knew what had happened beneath the tower. The chamber, the flame, the mirror's shattering cry. He had crept back just before dawn, clothes torn and heart pounding, and had pretended to wake with the others. But something inside him had changed. The silence of the mirror's destruction still rang in his ears, yet beneath it lay another sound, faint, distant, like a heartbeat buried in stone. He couldn't tell whether it was memory or something that lingered. At breakfast, the great hall shimmered with golden light and clinking cutlery. Students laughed, owls swooped through the rafters, and steaming platters of eggs appeared before them. Evan moved among the crowd like a ghost. He caught fragments of conversation, Seamus complaining about homework, Lavender giggling about a new charm, Ron and Hermione bickering at the Gryffindor table. Yet none of it seemed real. When he sat down, Neville offered him a smile. "You all right, Evan? You look like you've been up all night." Evan managed a weak laugh. "Couldn't sleep? Strange dreams?" "Yeah," Neville said, buttering his toast. "Everyone's been having them lately. Maybe it's the weather." Evan nodded absently, but his gaze drifted to the staff table, where Professor McGonagall was speaking in hushed tones with Dumbledore. For the briefest moment, the headmaster's blue eyes flicked toward Evan. It wasn't suspicion, more like quiet curiosity, as though he sensed something unseen. Evan looked away quickly. All that day he felt watched, not by teachers, but by the castle itself. The torches flickered when he passed, and the paintings turned their eyes toward him. In the corridors, whispers seemed to follow his footsteps, faint, wordless echoes that faded when he turned to listen. By evening, his nerves were frayed. He told himself it was only fear, the aftershock of what he'd done. Yet when he climbed through the portrait hole into the common room, he froze, or rather, it should have been gone, but the space where it had stood was wrong somehow. The air shimmered faintly, and when he stepped closer, he felt warmth radiating from the empty wall. The stones themselves pulsed with a slow, rhythmic glow. "No," he whispered, "you're gone. I broke you." The glow brightened, and a voice, softer than breath, drifted through the air. "Did you, Evan? Or did you free me?" He stumbled back. "Alden?" The voice laughed, low, distant, and familiar. "Names fade, but fire endures. You think courage can be caged behind glass? You have carried it within you now." Evan clutched his wand. "What do you want from me?" "Only what was begun," the voice said. "You sought belonging. You found it in reflection. But the mirror was never the prison, Evan. It was the gate." The glow flared, and for an instant, he saw something take shape in the light. Not Alden exactly, but a shadow of him, burning like a memory carved from flame. Then it vanished. "Leave me alone," Evan whispered hoarsely. "I'm not your vessel. I won't be used." The fire in the hearth leapt higher, answering him like a heartbeat. Then all fell still. That night he dreamed again. He stood in the ruined chamber beneath the tower, the ember heart's ashes smoldering faintly. Alden stood across from him, eyes now dull and hollow. "You think you've destroyed me," the apparition said, "but courage and pride are twin flames. Feed one and the other burns too." Evan reached for his wand, but his hand passed through it like smoke. "You're not real?" Alden's voice softened. "Then why do you fear me?" The flames around them flared, and the dream dissolved into darkness. When Evan awoke, dawn was creeping through the curtains. The dormitory was silent, the others still asleep. He dressed quickly and left before anyone stirred. He didn't know where he was going until he found himself outside Professor McGonagall's office. He could tell her everything. About the mirror, the chamber, the voice. But something stopped him. A strange certainty that she wouldn't understand, that no one could. Instead, he turned away and wandered toward the library. Madame Pince eyed him suspiciously as he slipped inside. The shelves were high and shadowed, the air heavy with dust and parchment. He made his way to the restricted section, heart thudding, and began to search. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, only that he needed answers. After an hour, he found a volume bound in red leather. Its title faded almost to nothing: The Chronicles of the Founders. He opened it carefully. Between the brittle pages, he found a passage that made his blood run cold. Of Godric's disciples, one fell from grace, a youth named Alden Caro, who sought to claim the Ember Heartstone. Though brave, his heart was prideful. He betrayed his house and was bound within the mirror of Gryffindor, a relic meant to reflect courage but not to grant it. Thus his spirit lingers, seeking host through the hearts of the lonely. Evan's hands shook. The description matched everything Alden had said, and twisted it. The mirror had not been a punishment of sorrow, but a prison of corruption. The connection Alden had spoken of was possession. He snapped the book shut, breathing hard. "He's trying to use me," he murmured, "to escape through me." A faint laugh echoed from the shelves. Evan froze. "I already have." He spun around, wand raised. The library was empty, the only sound the rustle of pages turning in a distant aisle. But when he looked down, his shadow wavered, and for an instant he saw a second silhouette beside his own, tall and slender, outlined in fire. He ran. Down corridors and staircases he fled until he burst out into the courtyard. Snow whirled around him and his breath rose in clouds. He stopped only when he reached the frozen lake. The sky above was pale and cold. "Evan, don't run. You wanted courage, and I can give it." He turned, and there, standing upon the snow, was Alden, whole again, his crimson robes untouched by the wind. His eyes glowed faintly gold, and when he smiled, the snow hissed at his feet. "I am not your enemy," Alden said softly. "I am what you could become. The world sees you now because of me." Evan raised his wand, hand trembling. "I don't want your help." Alden tilted his head. "You can't deny me. I am part of you now. When you broke the mirror, our fates joined." The air shimmered with heat despite the cold. Beneath the ice, faint ripples glowed red, as though something ancient stirred beneath the lake's frozen skin. Evan took a step back. "Then I'll find a way to break it again." Alden's smile widened, and for a moment his face flickered, half his own, half Evan's reflection. Courage can't be broken, Evan. It can only burn. The wind rose, howling through the courtyard. Snow swirled like ash. And as the storm thickened, Alden's shape dissolved into flame, a bright, terrible blaze that sank into the frozen lake with a hiss. Evan stood trembling, wand still raised, heart hammering. The fire was gone, the ice was whole once more, but in the silence that followed deep beneath the surface, something pulsed, slow, steady, alive. He turned toward the castle, the snow crunching beneath his boots, and whispered to the empty air, "Then let it burn in me instead." The wind carried his words away into the white, and far below, where the lake met the roots of the castle, a single ember glowed, waiting. Winter deepened over Hogwarts, and the castle seemed to retreat into itself. Icicles hung from the towers like crystal daggers, and the lake froze so solid that even the giant squid had disappeared into its depths. Students hurried through the halls, wrapped in scarves and cloaks, laughed, yet beneath the merriment Evan Tallow felt the chill of something colder than winter. Since that night by the lake, the world around him had changed. Not outwardly. Lessons went on. Snowball fights erupted in the courtyards, and Fred and George Weasley continued their usual chaos. But within him, something burned, a faint warmth behind his ribs, like a spark that refused to die. It pulsed when he was angry, brightened when he was afraid, and once, when he nearly slipped on the icy stairs, it flared and steadied his balance, as though guiding his step. At first, Evan tried to ignore it. He told himself it was only nerves, a lingering trace of magic from the mirror. But as days turned into weeks, he began to feel that he was not entirely alone inside his own mind. When he caught his reflection now, in windows and polished armor, even in puddles, he sometimes thought he saw a flicker of golden light behind his eyes. Alden's light. The thought filled him with dread, yet also a strange strength. He found himself more confident in class, quicker to speak, quicker to act. Professor McGonagall even praised him during Transfiguration for work she called unexpectedly bold. The compliment should have pleased him, yet it only deepened the unease curling inside. Late one evening, as the tower slept, Evan sat by the fire again. The warmth no longer comforted him. The flames seemed to listen. "You can't be gone," he whispered. "I feel you." The fire crackled, answering only with sparks. For a moment he thought he saw the outline of a face, faint, shifting, swallowed by the embers. That night he dreamed of the Founders' era, vast halls lit by torches, banners of red and gold rippling above warriors in armor. He saw Godric Gryffindor himself, tall and broad-shouldered, his sword gleaming in firelight. And beside him, just behind, stood Alden, younger, eyes bright with admiration. But then the dream darkened. He reached for the sword, and when Gryffindor turned to stop him, flames erupted between them. Evan awoke with a gasp, sweat cold on his brow. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting faint crimson on the walls. He rose, pulling on his robes, and left the dormitory. The castle's corridors stretched silent around him. The portraits were asleep. Only the faint hum of enchantments filled the air. Something called to him. A whisper, distant but persistent, drawing him down through the spiraling staircases toward the lower floors. He followed it without question. At last he reached the entrance to the old dungeons beneath the castle, a place seldom used since the Founders' time. The air smelled of damp stone and candle wax. His wand light wavered on the walls, revealing faded carvings of lions and flames. "Why am I here?" he murmured. A voice answered, soft and familiar. "Because courage cannot rest." Alden's voice. Evan's heart lurched. "I destroyed you." "No," the voice replied. "You freed what was bound. The fire that once served me now lives in you, but fire seeks a vessel. It cannot burn alone." "Then you'll burn out," Evan said sharply. "I won't let you use me." A low chuckle echoed through the chamber. "You misunderstand. I do not wish to use you, Evan. I wish to finish what we began. The Ember Heart still lives, buried deep beneath this castle, and its power belongs to the one who dares to claim it." Evan shook his head. "You tricked me once." "Did I?" Alden's tone softened. "You stood against umbrage. You spoke when others were silent. You have become what you were meant to be. That is no trick. That is truth." Evan's wand hand trembled. "Why me?" "Because you were invisible," Alden whispered. "You know the sting of being overlooked. So did I. But imagine, Evan, imagine never being unseen again. To carry the fire that founded this house, to lead where even heroes faltered." The words, "That power cost you everything." "Yes," Alden admitted, "and it will cost you too, unless you learn to master it." The torchlight dimmed. The air shivered with the echo of distant magic. "Go to the old Gryffindor wing," Alden said. "Beneath the lion statue you will find the door that even Dumbledore has forgotten. There your trial awaits." The voice faded. Evan stood alone in the dark, breath quick and uneven. He wanted to walk away, to tell himself it was only his imagination. But he knew the truth. He'd felt the fire alive beneath his skin. It was no dream. By dawn, he had made his choice. The next night, when curfew bells echoed through the halls, he slipped from the dormitory and descended the tower stairs. The castle slept in silence, its windows frosted over, moonlight falling across the stone floors. He reached the old Gryffindor wing, a corridor sealed for centuries, its entrance hidden behind a tapestry of roaring lions. With a whispered spell, he brushed the fabric aside and found a narrow stair curling down into the dark. The air below was thick with dust and age. He descended slowly, wand raised, until he reached a small chamber lit by a single torch that never seemed to burn out. At the far end stood a massive stone lion carved with runes that glowed faintly red. Beneath its paws, half buried in the floor, shimmered a sigil shaped like a flame. Evan knelt. The warmth from the sigil pulsed faintly against his skin. "You found it?" said Alden's voice, echoing faintly through the air. Evan didn't look up. "What happens now?" "Now," said the voice, "you prove your heart." The sigil flared. Light burst through the room, and the lion's eyes blazed to life. A roar shook the chamber, and Evan stumbled back as the statue began to move. Slowly, heavily, its stone mane rippling like molten rock. "Courage," the voice thundered, "is not given. It is earned." The lion lunged. Evan bared Protego. The shield shimmered, sparks flying as the lion's paw struck. He felt the force of it rattle through his bones. "Stand!" Alden's voice shouted. "Do not run from what you are." Evan rose, heart pounding. "I am not your apprentice." He raised his wand and shouted, "Expulso!" The blast struck the lion square in the chest, sending cracks spidering across its form. But instead of crumbling, it laughed, a deep, echoing sound that came from the stones themselves. "Bravery is not destruction," the lion said. "It is choice." Then it charged again. Evan's instincts flared. Not fear this time, but something stronger. The warmth in his chest surged outward, meeting the blow with fire that erupted from his wand in a blaze of gold. The chamber filled with light. When it faded, the lion was still. Only ashes remained. Evan stood gasping, wand lowered, chest burning with the echo of the spell. The sigil beneath him glowed once more, then slowly sank into the floor, leaving behind a faint glimmer. From the silence came Alden's voice, soft and distant now. You have done what I could not. You have faced yourself. Remember this, Evan Tallow. Courage is not to be seen, but to endure unseen. Then the warmth within him eased, fading to a steady glow. No longer a foreign flame, but part of him. He stood alone in the empty chamber, the torch flickering gently. Outside, the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls, and though the world would never know of the fire that had burned beneath the tower, the boy who once felt invisible climbed back toward the waking castle, carrying within him the quiet heart of a lion. The dawn that followed broke pale and uncertain, its light spilling weakly through the frost-coated windows of Hogwarts. Snow drifted across the grounds in silent waves, covering the stone paths, and within the castle walls, students stirred to the hum of a new day, unaware that beneath their feet, something ancient had awakened. Evan Tallow returned to the Gryffindor common room just as the sun touched the top of the eastern tower. His robes were torn at the hem, his hair damp with sweat, and yet he felt different, lighter somehow. The warmth that had once burned like a fever beneath his ribs now settled into something gentler, a steady, pulsing glow that neither frightened nor consumed him. He sank into an armchair near the fire, the same one where his story had begun, and stared at the flames as though seeing them for the first time. They no longer seemed to whisper his name or dance in strange reflection. They simply burned, calm, bright, ordinary. "Morning, Evan," Neville said sleepily as he came down the stairs, rubbing his eyes. "You're up early?" Evan smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep?" Neville nodded, yawning. "That makes two of us. I think the whole castle's restless lately. Something about the air feels charged, doesn't it?" Evan's smile faltered a little. "Maybe just the storm." He said nothing more, but his thoughts raced behind his calm expression. What he had seen beneath the tower, the stone lion, the voice that had tested his heart, had left a mark no one else could see. For the first time since he'd come to Hogwarts, Evan felt that he understood what it meant to be a Gryffindor. Not loud courage, not glory in battle, but a quiet strength that stood against the dark, even when no one was watching. But the castle, it seemed, remembered what he had done. Over the next few days, odd things began to happen. Candles flared when he entered a room. The portraits of old Gryffindors bowed slightly as he passed, their painted eyes following him with strange reverence. Once, when Peeves tried to trip him in the corridor, the poltergeist suddenly yelped and shot backward. "Blimey," Seamus muttered after witnessing it. "You've got some kind of luck charm or something?" Evan shrugged. Or something. At night, he could no longer hear Alden's voice. The mirror was gone, its magic extinguished. Yet sometimes, when the wind sighed through the tower windows, he thought he caught a whisper, not of warning, but of memory. Courage is not to be seen, but to endure unseen. He held those words close. Weeks passed. The winter snows began to melt, and sunlight poured into the courtyards once more. Life at Hogwarts returned to its familiar rhythm. Lessons, laughter, the endless hum of enchantment that filled every corridor. Evan's newfound steadiness did not go unnoticed. Hermione, ever observant, remarked one afternoon in the library, "You've changed, Evan. You used to sit alone in the back. Now you're, well, different." He looked up from his parchment, smiling. "Maybe I finally learned what house I'm in." She returned the smile, though her eyes held quiet curiosity. "Whatever it is, it suits you." Yet even as peace returned, a shadow lingered in the back of his mind, a quiet awareness that magic of such power did not simply vanish. One night, long after the others had gone to sleep, Evan sat by the window, overlooking the lake. The surface was still frozen near the center, the moonlight turning it to silver glass. He remembered the night Alden's flame had vanished beneath that ice, and as he watched, he thought he saw, or perhaps only imagined, a faint glow beneath the surface, deep and unmoving like an ember buried under snow. He closed his eyes. "Rest," he whispered, "let it end." But endings were never so simple at Hogwarts. The next day, rumors spread through the school. A Ravenclaw boy claimed he'd seen fire flickering beneath the lake during his early morning walk. A Slytherin girl swore she'd heard a voice most dismissed it as the usual ghostly chatter of the old castle, but Dumbledore's gaze grew thoughtful when he heard. That evening, as the great hall filled with the clatter of supper, Dumbledore rose. "Students," he said gently, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "there are ancient magics in this castle that sometimes stir when called by hearts too young to bear them. Be cautious where you wander, and remember, courage is best tempered with wisdom." The headmaster's eyes, bright as blue fire, met Evan's across the room. There was no accusation in them, only understanding. After the feast, Evan lingered in the entrance hall, unsure whether to speak to him. But before he could decide, Dumbledore approached, his footsteps soft as falling ash. "A difficult thing, isn't it?" the old wizard said, "to stand in a place where you've faced your own heart." Evan swallowed. "You know." Dumbledore's smile was kind. "Hogwarts always knows. The walls themselves whisper of courage, and yours was heard." Evan hesitated. "There's something still beneath the lake, something that didn't go away." "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly. "Old fire does not die easily, but it no longer has a hold upon you. That is enough." He laid a gentle hand on Evan's shoulder. "Few students ever touch the roots of this castle's magic and return unchanged. You have done so and lived to tell the tale. Do not carry guilt, Mr. Tallow. Carry understanding." The boy nodded, his throat tight. Dumbledore's gaze softened. "And perhaps, if ever the fire stirs again, you will be ready to guide it, not as a lonely student, but as one who has found his place among lions." Then he turned and left, his robes whispering against the flagstones. That night, Evan returned to the common room. The fire crackled softly, warm and golden. He sat before it, staring into the flames. They reflected in his eyes, steady and alive, and he felt a quiet peace settle over him. He did not hear Alden's voice again, not truly. Yet once, as he drifted toward sleep, he thought he caught a final echo in the flames. A whisper, both proud and wistful. "You did what I could not." The sound faded, leaving only the hush of the fire. Winter gave way to spring. The snows melted, the lake thawed, and the forest beyond shimmered with new life. Students ran laughing across the lawns, their robes flying in the breeze. To them, the dark days were gone. The warmth returned. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the light of the setting sun turned the castle walls to gold, Evan would pause at the window and look toward the lake. Far below in the shifting depths, he would see a faint gleam, a glimmer like a heart still beating in the dark. He would smile then, not with fear, but understanding. The ember heart still burned, not as a curse, but as a reminder that even in loneliness, courage endures. And though he never spoke of what had passed to anyone, not even to Dumbledore, there were whispers among the portraits that the House of Gryffindor had grown stronger that year, that a new light had kindled in its tower. Evan Tallow, once the boy who sat alone by the fire, now walked the halls with quiet purpose, his eyes bright, his steps sure. The castle watched him as it always had, and in the deep places where ancient magic slept, the old fire murmured contentedly, its long vigil at last at peace. For courage, once truly found, does not fade. It waits, calm and patient, for the next heart brave enough to bear its flame. Spring settled over Hogwarts with a kind of quiet joy. The snow that had blanketed the grounds for months melted into glistening streams that ran through the grass, and the scent of damp earth rose from the courtyards. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in the old stone walls, and owls wept for the first time since winter's beginning. Laughter echoed freely again through the halls. Even the portraits seemed livelier. The knights in armor polished themselves, and the ghosts floated with less gloom than usual. Yet in the midst of this renewed life, Evan Tallow carried within him the memory of fire, the lingering echo of courage hard won, and the quiet burden of something left unfinished. His nights were peaceful now, his dreams no longer haunted by Alden's voice or visions of ancient chambers. But peace in a place like Hogwarts never lasted long. Strange things had a way of finding their way back to life, and it was not long before the castle reminded him that even in calm, magic never truly slept. It began subtly. One evening while studying near the window, Evan noticed the air shimmer faintly above the hearth, like heat rising from coals. The fire had long burned down, yet the flicker persisted. He told himself it was only a trick of the light, but the shimmer returned the next night, and the next, growing stronger each time. Then, one afternoon, Professor McGonagall announced that a section of the lake had begun to thaw unevenly. A strange light glowed beneath the ice at night, golden and slow, like a heart beating under glass. The professors took turns investigating, but none could find the cause. Evan knew. He felt it before anyone spoke of it, a pulse in the air that matched the warmth beneath his ribs. The ember heart still lived, not within him now, but in the depths of the lake where Alden's flame had fallen. It called to him softly, not with words, but with a kind of yearning. That night he lay awake listening to the wind sigh through the tower. The castle slept, but he could not. He knew what he had to do. When the tower clock struck midnight, he rose and dressed quietly. The common room was empty, the fire dim. He stood for a moment looking at the scarlet banners and the gold. Then he whispered, "I'll come back." He slipped through the portrait hole and down the spiral stairs, the corridors dark and hushed. The suits of armor stood silent, sentinel, and the portraits slumbered in their frames. As he reached the entrance hall, moonlight poured through the great windows, painting the floor in pale silver. Outside, the night was still and cold. The lake stretched vast before him, the surface rippling faintly beneath the moon. He walked to the edge, his breath misting in the air, and gazed down. There, far below, burned a faint golden glow. Deep beneath the dark water, Evan knelt, pressing his palm to the surface. The ice was gone now, melted by spring, and the warmth below. The water lapped softly against the shore. "I know what you want," he whispered, "but you can't come back through me." The reflection in the water rippled, and for an instant he thought he saw Alden's face again, pale and distant, eyes glowing faintly. "You still guard it," the voice murmured from the depths. "The fire endures because it remembers, but even courage can fade if left untended." Evan shook his head. "It doesn't need tending. It needs peace." "Peace?" The reflection's voice turned faintly amused. "You think fire knows peace? It was never made to rest. It was made to burn, to guide, to warn, to protect. The castle itself was built upon its flame, and it will rise again." The surface stilled. Evan's reflection looked back at him. Only the eyes gleamed faintly gold. He stepped back sharply. "No," he said, "I won't be your vessel again." The voice softened. "Then be my keeper. The flame is not evil, Evan. It is power. It is life. But left without a heart, it will seek one." Evan's heart pounded. He could feel it now, that warmth beneath the water, waiting. If it rose uncontrolled, who knew what it might burn? He took a breath and raised his wand. "Then I'll give it one." The air around him stirred. He closed his eyes, focusing on the steady warmth within his chest. The ember that had been his since that night beneath the tower. He could feel it stir, answering the call of the lake's flame. "Fiat lumen cordis," he whispered. "Let the heart of courage burn true." Light burst from his wand, golden and pure. It streamed into the water, threading through the dark like veins of sunlight. The lake glowed, brighter and brighter, until the whole surface shimmered like molten gold. The voice from below cried out, not in anger, but in release. The reflection shattered. The glow sank, slow and steady, until only calm ripples remained. Evan stood there for a long time, breathing hard, the wand trembling in his hand. When the light faded at last, he felt the warmth inside him settle again, no longer fierce or restless, but steady, peaceful. He turned toward the castle. In the high windows of Gryffindor Tower, a light flickered briefly, as though the common room fire had answered his spell. The next morning, word spread through the school that the strange glow beneath the lake had vanished. Professor Flitwick declared it a most unusual but harmless phenomenon, and Dumbledore, when asked, only smiled that quiet, knowing smile of his. Evan said nothing. He went to class, studied, and laughed when Seamus managed to set his own sleeve on fire during charms. The world moved on, as it always did. But that night, when he sat again by the common room fire, he noticed something. The flames burned with a richer hue than before, deep gold instead of orange, and into the heart of the fire, faintly, a shape seemed to shimmer, a lion, proud and still, its mane woven of light. He smiled, and for a moment he thought he heard a whisper, not Alden's voice, but something older, warmer, filled with pride. "Well done, child of the lion." He did not speak of it. Some things at Hogwarts belonged not to words, but to memory. Students would come and go, and the story of the lonely Gryffindor who tamed the fire would become another quiet rumor told by candlelight in the dormitories. Yet on cold nights, when snow swept over the castle and the lake froze once more, the fire in the Gryffindor common room would burn with a strange, steady glow. And if one listened closely, they might hear it. A faint, echoing heartbeat in the flames, like the pulse of something ancient and proud, still watching over them. Evan Tallow never sought fame or recognition, but when he stood years later as a young man in crimson robes, his courage quietly tested and his heart steady as firelight, even the portraits seemed to bow their heads, for though the boy had once been unseen, he had become what all true Gryffindors were meant to be: a guardian of courage, a keeper of flame, and a reminder that even the smallest spark, if tended with a heart, can light the darkness of an age. And so the castle endured, its heart aglow as all true magic does, not blazing in glory, but burning gently in the hearts of those brave enough to believe. Summer drew near, softening the chill that had lingered in the stones of Hogwarts. The days grew long and bright, and the castle hummed with the restless energy of a term soon to end. Students spent their afternoons by the lake, books forgotten as sunlight danced across the rippling water. The scent of blooming lilacs drifted from the greenhouses, and the air carried the sound of laughter and distant bird song. Yet for Evan Tallow, peace never came so easily. Though the flame in his chest had quieted, he felt a strange connection still, not of danger, but of awareness, as though the castle itself breathed with him. Sometimes when he walked the corridors, he sensed the very walls, listening, remembering. It was not a burden, but a bond. And though he could not explain it, he understood that Hogwarts had accepted him. Still, even bonds between magic and man have their trials. It began on an afternoon in early June, when Professor McGonagall summoned him to her office. The room smelled of parchment and tea, and the sunlight through the windows gleamed off polished wood and brass. She sat behind her desk, hands folded, her expression calm but searching. "Mr. Tallow," she said, "you have had an unusual year." "Yes, Professor," he replied quietly. "Your work has improved greatly," she continued. "Your professors speak highly of your diligence, and even Professor Snape noted your progress, albeit grudgingly." Evan almost smiled. "Thank you." Her eyes softened, but only slightly. "And yet strange things seem to follow you. Fires that burn without fuel, lights under the lake, portraits that bow when you pass. Would you like to tell me why?" He hesitated. The truth lingered at the edge of his thoughts. The mirror Alden, the Ember Heart. But to speak of such things would be to stir them again, and he had worked too hard to let them rest. "I think," he said carefully, "that Hogwarts is teaching me in its own way." For a long moment, McGonagall studied him. Then she nodded. "Perhaps it is. The castle has a way of choosing its students and its lessons." She leaned forward. "Whatever you have found, Mr. Tallow, remember this. Power, when earned through loneliness, can be as dangerous as it is noble. You are not alone any longer." Evan bowed his head. "I'll remember." As he left her office, he felt the warmth of the sunlight on his shoulders. The words stayed with him. "You are not alone any longer." But later that week, something began to stir again, something old and half forgotten. It started as a whisper in the common room, passed from portrait to portrait, a rumor of movement deep beneath the castle, a faint tremor felt in the dungeons, a flicker of gold seen. Peeves sang of it as he floated through the halls. "Fire below, fire below. The lion sleeps where no winds blow." Most students laughed it off, but not Evan. He felt the pulse before he heard the rumors, a faint warmth under his palm whenever he touched the castle walls. The Ember Heart had not perished, after all. Its power, though subdued, still lived beneath the school, bound now not to pride but to purpose. One evening, while the sky glowed with the colors of sunset, Evan walked alone by the lake. The water shimmered like glass, and the giant squid drifted lazily near the surface. Across the shore, the castle's reflection rippled gently, tall and serene. He knelt by the edge, listening to the quiet. "I know you're there," he said softly, "but this time stay still." A breeze stirred the surface, and for a moment he thought he heard an echo. Faint, approving, like the sigh of a great creature at rest. He smiled and stood, but peace was a fragile thing, especially at Hogwarts. That night, as the castle slept, thunder rolled across the mountains. Lightning flashed, and the storm broke over the towers, rain lashing the windows like silver arrows. In the depths below, unseen by any student or teacher, something stirred. A fragment of Alden's lingering magic. A shard of will too stubborn to fade drifted through the old corridors beneath the tower. It was not the man himself, not even a ghost, but the echo of his longing, bound to the place where he had first betrayed his master. The echo took form in the dark, a shape of firelight and shadow. It moved not with purpose, but with memory, drawn to the chamber where Evan had faced the stone lion. The ashes of that battle still lay upon the floor, cold and undisturbed. The echo paused before them. A voice, thin and distant, whispered, "Courage unguarded burns the brightest." Then it sank into the earth, vanishing without a trace. Above, the storm raged on. The next morning, the air held a heaviness that no one could name. Even the fire in the Gryffindor common room burned lower than usual, as though listening. Evan felt it the moment he entered. The warmth in his chest flared, uneasy. He looked around the room, at the banners, the chairs, the crackling hearth, and knew that something below was changing. That night the dreams returned. He saw the old chamber again, only now the lion statue was gone. In its place burned a single ember, faint but defiant. Around it shadows swirled like smoke. From within them came a whisper, not Alden's voice, but another, deeper, older. "Guard what was given," it said, "for courage once freed must never be lost again." He awoke before dawn, breath shallow, the dream still echoing through him. He understood now. The Ember Heart was not a curse nor a weapon. It was a trust, a fragment of the Founder's will, meant to pass from one heart to another in times of need. And somehow, it had chosen him. As the first light of day broke over the castle, Evan stood by the window, watching the sun gild the turrets and towers. Below, the lake shimmered faintly gold, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw the reflection of a lion standing proud upon the water's surface before fading into light. He smiled then, not with triumph, but with quiet resolve. Whatever lay ahead, whatever the castle would ask of him, he would be ready, because courage, once awakened, did not sleep again. It waited, patient as flame, steadfast as stone, until the next heart called it forth. And though the story of Evan Tallow would fade into whispers and legend, the fire he kindled would remain, burning unseen in the heart of Gryffindor Tower, as it had since the days of Godric himself. Long after the boy was gone, students who sat by that same fire would sometimes feel a strange warmth, a quiet comfort, as though the flames themselves whispered to them. And somewhere deep beneath the castle, where the old magic slept, a single ember glowed, eternal, watchful, waiting for the next lonely heart brave enough to bear its light. Summer faded into the soft gold of autumn, and the castle of Hogwarts breathed anew, the air filled with the scent of parchment, polished wood, and ripened apples from the orchard by Hagrid's hut. Students returned from holiday, their laughter spilling through the corridors once more, their robes rustling like restless leaves. The great hall glittered with candles and floating pumpkins, marking the approach of another year's beginning. Evan Tallow, now in his 6th year, stood among them, changed in quiet ways few could name. His face was calmer, older somehow, his eyes steady and thoughtful. Those who had once overlooked him now greeted him as though they had always known him. He accepted it with humility, though a trace of shyness still lingered, as if he remembered too well the boy who had sat alone by the fire. Gryffindor Tower had not forgotten him either. The common room's hearth burned brighter whenever he passed, and sometimes the portraits whispered his name. Not in awe, but in fond remembrance, as one speaks of a friend long trusted. Yet beneath that peace the castle still held its secrets. Magic never truly slept within those walls. It waited, patient and eternal, for the hearts brave enough to hear it. The year began as any other, filled with studies, Quidditch practice, and the distant rumble of rumors from the wider world. Dark times were stirring beyond the castle's reach. Whispers of danger, of a power gathering strength. But within Hogwarts, Dumbledore's calm presence kept fear at bay. Still some nights, the torches flickered without wind, and the floor beneath the tower trembled faintly, as if the earth itself stirred. Most dismissed it as the shifting of the Emberheart's presence had never left him entirely. It pulsed faintly in his chest, a gentle warmth that seemed to listen when he dreamed. It was late in October when the peace began to waver. One evening, while Evan studied by the fire, the flames dimmed suddenly, shrinking to embers. The air grew cold. A soft rustle echoed through the room. Like the flutter of wings, from the shadows near the staircase a figure stepped forward. It was not Alden, nor ghost, nor teacher, but a student, younger, small, with pale hair and uncertain eyes. "Sorry," the boy stammered. "Didn't mean to startle you." "I couldn't sleep." Evan smiled gently. "You're new, aren't you?" The boy nodded. "First year, name's Rowan. The others were talking about you. Said you once stopped a fire that tried to burn through the castle." Evan laughed softly. "That's a bit exaggerated." "Is it true, though?" Rowan asked, eyes wide. "That the fire was alive?" Evan hesitated. "In a way, yes, but not in the way you think. It wasn't evil, just lost." Rowan frowned. "How can fire be lost?" Evan looked into the hearth. The flames flickered softly, casting gold across his face. "Because even light needs purpose. Without it, it burns whatever it touches." The boy thought for a moment, then nodded solemnly, as if he understood something far older than his years. "My mom says courage works like that, too." Evan smiled faintly. "Your mom's wise." They spoke a little longer, about classes, about the strange staircases, about how the portraits sometimes moved when no one looked. When Rowan finally went to bed, Evan remained by the fire, thoughtful. He'd seen something in the boy, a spark of the same loneliness he once knew. That night, as he drifted to sleep, he dreamed again of the old chamber beneath the tower. The ashes were gone now, replaced by a soft, steady light. A flame that neither spread nor consumed, but waited. Calm, a voice spoke. Not Alden's, not Godric's, but one that seemed to come from the castle itself. Courage is not passed by blood, but by choice. When the next heart falters, you must guide it. Evan awoke with the echo still in his ears. He knew then what the Ember Heart had become. Not a relic, but a trust passed from soul to soul. In the days that followed, he began to notice Rowan more often. The boy struggled in lessons, shy and easily flustered. Other students teased him, though not cruelly. Evan remembered that feeling too well, of wanting to disappear into the background. One evening he found Rowan sitting alone on the stairs, head bowed. "They think I don't belong here," the boy whispered. "The Sorting Hat said Gryffindor, but I'm not brave. I'm just scared." Evan sat beside him. "Do you know what the hat told me?" Rowan shook his head. "It said courage isn't something you're born with. It's what you choose when fear stands in front of you." The boy looked up. "Did you ever make that choice?" Evan's smile was quiet and sad. "Once, and it changed everything." He rose then, offering Rowan his hand. "Come on, let's go back. The fire's waiting." That night, as they returned to the common room, the hearth flared brighter than before, casting a golden glow that filled the room with warmth. Some of the older students glanced up, murmuring in surprise, but Evan only smiled and guided Rowan toward the light. The boy hesitated at first, then knelt beside the fire, watching the flames dance. "It feels alive," he whispered. "It is?" Evan said softly. "It's been here since before either of us were born. It remembers every heart that's found courage in this tower." The fire crackled, sparks rising like tiny stars. For a moment it seemed to form a shape, the faint outline of a lion's head, mane flowing like molten gold. Rowan gasped. "Did you see that?" Evan nodded. "I did." The fire warmed their faces, and outside the wind sighed across the towers. At last, Evan said, "One day, you'll tell someone else what I told you tonight, when they feel small or afraid. That's how the flame stays alive." Rowan looked at him, eyes shining. "Will it ever go out?" Evan glanced into the fire, seeing not the flames, but all they stood for. The countless years of courage, the whispers of those who had come before. He shook his head. "Not while there's someone willing to light it again." And in that moment the fire burned brighter still, as if the very soul of Gryffindor itself listened and approved. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the grounds in silver. But within the tower, warmth and light reigned, steady and unyielding. In the years that followed, the story of Evan Tallow and the Ember Heart became legend. A tale told by the fire each winter to new students who feared they were not brave enough. And when their eyes widened in wonder, older voices would say, "It's true, the fire still burns for those who need it most." Far below, deep in the heart of the castle, the old Ember Heart pulsed gently in its hidden vault, its glow mirrored in every flame above. It no longer sought a vessel, for it had found its purpose at last, to kindle courage wherever shadows fell. And so it waited, faithful as time, ready for the next lonely soul who dared to reach toward the light and whisper, "I am not afraid." Years passed as quietly as seasons turning a page. The world beyond Hogwarts darkened with its own storms, and yet within those enchanted walls the fires still burned bright. The castle had seen centuries of triumph and sorrow, but it endured, as all things built upon courage must. Evan Tallow had grown into a young man. His once uncertain eyes now held the calm strength of one who had faced himself and prevailed. His name was he was not the hero of tales told at feasts, nor the captain of Quidditch matches. He was something rarer, a figure of quiet steadiness, one who brought light where it faltered. To the younger students, he had become a kind of legend, though he never encouraged it. They whispered of the night the lake glowed gold, of the fire that had tested his heart. Some claimed the founder himself had chosen him, that the Lion of Gryffindor walked beside him unseen. Evan smiled when he heard such things, for he knew the truth was simpler and far more mysterious. Magic, he had learned, was not always thunder or spectacle. Often it was whisper and warmth, the unseen thread binding hearts together when fear sought to unravel them. By the time his final year arrived, Evan had taken on the role of prefect, though he had not sought it. Professor McGonagall had offered the badge with that familiar look of tempered pride. "I trust you know what leadership means, Mr. Tallow," she had said. "I think so," he'd replied quietly. "It means keeping the fire lit." The year began under skies heavy with rain. The forbidden forest shrouded itself in mist, and thunder rolled over the mountains. The older students spoke in murmurs of growing shadows beyond the school walls, of strange disappearances and unrest in wizarding towns. The war that Dumbledore had long feared was drawing close, and even Hogwarts, strong as it was, could feel the tension rising like an unseen tide. Evan felt it too, the warmth in his chest. That faint remnant of the ember heart stirred restlessly, as though aware that something ancient within the castle had awakened in response to danger. It was on such a storm-heavy evening that he heard it again, the whisper, not the tempting call of Alden's voice, nor the echo of the founders, but the murmur of the castle itself. He'd gone to the library after curfew. Thunder grumbled beyond the high windows as he turned a page, the candlelight flickering over his notes. Then faintly, from the direction of the north wall, he heard a voice, deep, steady, and unmistakably alive. "Keeper of Flame," it said. Evan rose at once, wand in hand. "Who's there?" The library fell still. The portraits hung in silence, their painted eyes watching but saying nothing. Then the whisper came again, threading through the air like smoke. "The heart stirs, the wards weaken. The shadows remember the light." Before he could speak, the torches along the shelves flared, one by one, filling the room with golden fire. For a heartbeat, he saw them, faint outlines in the light. 4 figures standing together at the far end of the hall. One wore the colors of red and gold, another blue and bronze, another green and silver, the last yellow and black. The founders. Their shapes flickered like mirages, but he felt their presence as surely as warmth upon his skin. Godric Gryffindor's voice filled the space, resonant and steady. "The balance strains, the fire you bear must not falter. Darkness rises to claim what we built." Evan's throat tightened. "What do you want me to do?" "Guard what endures," said Helga Hufflepuff, her tone gentle but grave. "For courage without kindness turns cruel, and flame without mercy consumes." "The Ember Heart was never meant for destruction," added Rowena Ravenclaw, her image shimmering with light. "It is knowledge wrapped in fire, the will to rise against despair. That will is needed again." Salazar Slytherin's gaze, sharp and unreadable, lingered on Evan, and yet power unchecked invites ruin. Do not mistake duty for destiny. The 4 figures began to fade. "Wait," Evan called. "Where do I find this darkness? How do I stop it?" Their voices blended as they vanished, leaving only Gryffindor's echo behind. "The courage you seek lies where fear begins. Then he stood in silence, heart racing. The ember heart pulsed faintly beneath his ribs, not in fear, but in readiness. The next morning, the castle awoke to whispers of strange occurrences. The suits of armor lining the main corridor had moved during the night, forming a silent guard before the entrance to the dungeons. A low rumble had been heard beneath the great hall, like the growl of something vast and unseen. Dumbledore's expression at breakfast was thoughtful but calm, his eyes glinting with the faintest spark of worry. "The castle stirs," he murmured to McGonagall, though Evan, sitting nearby, could just catch the words. He knew then what must be done. That night, when the school lay sleeping, he returned to the depths beneath Gryffindor Tower. The same path he'd walked years before, when the mirror still stood and Alden's voice had lured him to the flame. The air was colder now, thick with the scent of stone and memory. At the heart of the chamber, he found it, the ember heart, faint and flickering, as though struggling to stay alive. Shadows crept around its edges, not ghosts, but fragments of old magic twisted by fear. They coiled like serpents, whispering in voices too soft to name. Evan stepped forward. "You've fed enough on fear," he said, his voice low but firm. "You belong to light." The whispers hissed in reply. "Light fades, fear endures. You cannot banish what is born from shadow." He raised his wand. "Maybe not, but I can choose which one I feed." With a breath he closed his eyes and summoned the warmth within him. Not pride, not rage, but the simple, steady courage that had carried him through loneliness, through temptation, through every quiet trial since. The flame in his heart answered. It rose, golden and bright, spilling through his wand into the chamber. The shadows shrieked, folding back like smoke. The ember heart flared, its light filling every crack in the walls. When at last the brilliance faded, silence returned, deep and peaceful. Evan sank to his knees, exhausted but smiling. The ember heart burned strong again, its glow calm and sure. Above, far from the quiet depths, Hogwarts exhaled. The torches brightened, the cold wind eased, and the storm outside the castle broke into gentle rain. The world turned, as it always did. When Evan returned to the common room at dawn, the fire in the hearth flared to greet him, golden, steady, eternal. He sat before it, feeling the warmth seep into his bones. For the first time, he understood that his story was not of a lonely boy or even of a hero, but of a keeper, one link in a chain that would never end. And somewhere in the walls, in the unseen places where the castle's heart beat slow and deep, a whisper drifted like a sigh of gratitude. The flame endures. Outside, the sunrise broke over the lake, turning the waters to gold, and for a moment, only a moment, the faint shape of a lion shone upon its surface before vanishing into light, leaving behind nothing but the reflection of a new day. The rain that followed that storm washed the castle clean, leaving the air sharp and bright with the scent of wet earth and lightning. Mist hung low over the lake, curling like silver thread along the water's surface, and the turrets of Hogwarts shone faintly in the pale dawn. It was as though the castle itself had awakened from a long sleep, its ancient stones breathing once more. Evan Tallow stood on the steps of Gryffindor Tower, cloak drawn tight around his shoulders, watching the light unfold over the grounds. The world below gleamed, every blade of grass, every puddle, every leaf on the forest edge, as if painted anew. And yet for all its peace, he felt something deeper, stirring, Not danger exactly, but expectation, as though the castle waited for him to understand what it already knew. That day, he moved. Everywhere he went, the castle responded to him. Torches flickered brighter, staircases shifted to ease his way, and the portraits whispered blessings under their breath. Even the ghosts, so often somber and distant, inclined their translucent heads when he passed. At dinner, the great hall glittered with its usual magic, but Evan could not eat. The warmth in his chest, that faint trace of the ember heart, pulsed with quiet insistence, as though urging him to listen. Dumbledore's voice carried softly from the staff table. "You are quiet tonight, Mr. Tallow," he said, eyes twinkling beneath his half-moon glasses. Evan hesitated. "Just thinking, sir." "Thinking," Dumbledore said gently, "is where many journeys begin. But be wary. The castle listens when you think too loudly." Their gazes met. Dumbledore's expression held that peculiar mix of mirth and gravity that masked more understanding than words could convey. Evan nodded slightly, and the headmaster smiled, as though the answer had already been given. Later that night, long after the students had gone to sleep, Evan walked again to the fire in the Gryffindor common room. The flames danced quietly, casting shadows of crimson and gold across the walls. He sat before them, eyes half closed, and whispered, "What do you want me to see?" The fire answered. At first, only warmth filled the room, rising and falling like a heartbeat. Then the flames deepened, turning from gold to white, from white to silver. Shapes began to form within. Faint at first, then clear. He saw Hogwarts, not as it was, but as it had once been. Its towers newly built, its halls alive with the magic of creation. He saw the four founders standing together, their wands raised, weaving enchantments into stone and sky. He saw Godric Gryffindor press his hand against the wall where the tower would rise and whisper the words that would bind his heart to it forever. "Let courage dwell where loneliness hides." He saw Alden Caro, the apprentice who had betrayed his trust, reaching for the ember heart with trembling hands, his eyes burning with the desperate need to be seen. And then the sealing spell, the mirror, the long silence. Finally, he saw himself, a boy alone by the fire staring into its depths. The flames faded, and the room returned to stillness. Evan sat motionless, understanding at last what the ember heart truly was. It was not a relic, nor a weapon, nor even a single fire. It was a reflection of courage born from fear, of light forged in loneliness. It had lived in Alden and Godric and countless hearts since, and now it lived in him. Outside thunder murmured again, distant but insistent. The wind pressed against the windows, as though whispering a warning. The world beyond the castle was changing, growing darker by the day, and the strength that Hogwarts had long sheltered might soon be tested once more. Evan rose. He could not stay in the tower forever. At dawn, he sought Dumbledore in his office. The room was alive with soft ticking and the glitter of enchanted instruments, each turning in patterns only the headmaster understood. Fawkes, the phoenix, perched upon his stand, his feathers gleaming like molten gold. Evan bowed his head. "Professor, I think I understand now what the Ember Heart was meant to do." Dumbledore looked up from his desk, his eyes bright with quiet approval. "Do you indeed?" "It's not meant to be kept," Evan said. "It's meant to be carried by those who need it most. But it's growing restless. I think it knows the world needs it again." The phoenix gave a low, melodious cry. Dumbledore nodded slowly. You are right. Courage cannot be contained, Mr. Tallow. It must walk among the fearful, not the fearless. The question is, where will it go next? Evan hesitated. If it's not me, then someone else. Maybe one who hasn't found it yet. Perhaps, Dumbledore murmured. But the fire, are you ready to let it go? The words struck deep. He had carried that warmth for years, had felt it shape him from a frightened boy into something stronger. To part with it would be to lose a part of himself, and yet he understood now that keeping it would be to deny its purpose. Yes, he said at last, I'm ready. Dumbledore smiled, not as a teacher, but as one who recognized the courage before him. Then the castle will know where to send it. That evening, as twilight bathed the towers in amber, Evan stood once more at the edge of the lake. The surface was calm, touched by the fading light of the setting sun. He closed his eyes and placed his hand over his heart. The warmth within pulsed once, twice, then began to fade, flowing through him like a sigh released. The water before him rippled. From its depths, a faint golden glow rose, gentle and steady. The light drifted upward, forming no shape, no words, only a promise that it would find another when the time came. Go, he whispered. They'll need you. The glow brightened, then sank into the horizon, vanishing into the gathering dusk. Evan stood for a long while, feeling the stillness settle around him. The air smelled of rain and earth, and the first stars began to appear above the towers. Though the warmth within him was gone, he felt no emptiness, only calm and a quiet certainty that he had done what was meant to be done. When he returned to the tower, the fire burned low, steady as ever. He sat before it, letting the silence wash over him. The portraits on the walls stirred faintly, smiling as though in approval. In the quiet, a single spark rose from the flames. Bright, golden, weightless, it drifted toward him, hovered for an instant, then vanished. And in that small sign he understood, though the ember heart had gone to seek another, a piece of it would always remain. For every fire leaves behind a trace of its warmth, a memory, a promise. Outside, the stars wheeled over the castle, and the night grew deep and peaceful. Somewhere in the world, a new spark had begun to burn, unseen, unknown, but alive. And Hogwarts, keeper of all its secrets, smiled in its sleep. The world beyond the castle grew restless. Dark clouds gathered in the south, and whispers of war passed through every wizarding home and alleyway. Yet Hogwarts, timeless and proud, stood like a beacon in the shadow, a citadel of light, its towers gleaming above the mist. The fire in its heart still burned, though unseen, carried now in the spirits of those who called it home. Evan Tallow, once the lonely student of Gryffindor Tower, had graduated that spring. He had left behind the common room, with its crimson banners and golden light, the laughter of his housemates, the murmur of the portraits that had watched him grow. The day he walked down the castle steps for the last time, the air was heavy with sunlight and the scent of summer grass. He had paused at the gate, turned back once, and whispered, "Keep them safe." The walls had seemed to listen. Now, months later, Evan wandered through a world that had grown far darker than any he had known as a student. Shadows lengthened over villages, and spells once meant for protection were spoken now in fear. The roads were quiet, the inns half empty. Yet wherever he went, he carried the calm that Hogwarts had given him, a flame no darkness could smother. In a small wizarding village nestled at the edge of the Highlands, He found work mending protective charms on homes and teaching young witches and wizards whose parents feared to send them away. He never spoke of his past, but those who met him said there was something unusual about the young man. A warmth that lingered in rooms after he left, a steadiness that made others braver just by standing near him. It was there, she was no older than 12, slight and freckled, her robes patched and worn. She came to him after a lesson, clutching her wand so tightly her knuckles were white. "Sir," she whispered, "I can't do it. The light spell, it doesn't work for me." Evan smiled gently. "Show me." She raised her wand, her voice trembling. "Lumos." Nothing. Only the sigh of the wind outside the window. "It's all right," he said softly. "Again." "I can't," she said near tears. "I'm afraid. What if—" He knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. "Do you know what courage is?" She shook her head. "It's not the absence of fear," he said. "It's the choice to stand anyway, try once more. But this time, don't fight your fear, just let the light find you." She swallowed hard, lifted her wand again, and whispered, "Lumos?" A small glow appeared at the tip, faint but real. She gasped, eyes wide. "There," Evan said, smiling. "You see? The light was always in you. It only needed a place to begin." She looked up at him, the glow reflecting in her eyes. "How did you know?" He paused, his gaze distant. "Because once, someone showed me too." That night, as the children left for home, Evan lingered by the classroom window. Outside, the hills were wrapped in fog, but through it he thought he saw a faint golden shimmer. A light upon the horizon, steady and slow, like a star that had never gone out. He knew it then. The Ember Heart had found its new keeper. Somewhere, perhaps in a castle far away, perhaps in the heart of a frightened child, the ancient flame had rekindled. Days passed and winter came. Snow blanketed the village, and the world grew silent beneath it. Yet even in the stillness there were signs of hope. Children laughed again, practicing spells by candlelight. Neighbors gathered by hearths to share warmth and stories. Evan's lessons became more than lessons. They became small beats. But one evening, as he closed the school for the night, he felt a familiar pulse deep within his chest. Faint, almost forgotten, but unmistakable. The Ember Heart called to him once more. He followed the pull beyond the village, through fields buried in snow and forests that whispered with old magic. The moon rose high, casting silver across the land. The air grew warm despite the frost. At last he reached a clearing, and there, standing beside a frozen stream, was the girl. She turned, her wand raised. A golden light burned at its tip, fierce and steady, far brighter than before. Her eyes were wide, but not afraid. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. "The light kept growing stronger. It wanted me to follow it." Evan's breath caught. "Do you know what it is?" She shook her head. "It feels alive." He nodded slowly. "It's called the Ember Heart. A very old kind of magic. It comes to those who need it most." "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you were brave enough to reach for it." The light flared brighter, spreading warmth through the clearing. The trees swayed though there was no wind, their branches whispering like voices long forgotten. Evan felt the air hum with the same power he had once known beneath the tower. The living heart of Hogwarts, reaching across time and distance to find its next bearer. The girl looked frightened now. "It's too much. I can't hold it." "Yes, you can," Evan said gently, "because you won't hold it alone." He stepped forward, placing his hand over hers. The light steadied, the wild energy softening into calm flame. Together they watched as it sank into her wand, leaving behind only a gentle glow. "There," he said, "now it's part of you." Her eyes shone. "Will it stay?" "For as long as you need it," he said, "and when your time comes, you'll know where to send it next." The snow fell years later, long after the war had passed, and peace had returned to the wizarding world. The story of Evan Tallow and the Ember Heart was still told, though no one knew if it was truth or legend. They said a quiet young man once carried the Founder's flame, and that he passed it to a child whose courage would shape the age to come. At Hogwarts, in the Gryffindor common room, the fire still burned with its golden hue, and on certain nights, when the world outside was cold and still, the portraits swore they saw two figures standing before the hearth. A man and a girl, one tall, one small, their faces lit by the same unwavering light. Perhaps it was memory, perhaps it was magic, but the flame never died. It lived in the hearts of those who believed, in the laughter that filled the tower, in the whispered stories told to frightened first years who thought themselves unworthy of their house. For courage once kindled does not vanish. It travels unseen from soul to soul, a spark eternal, waiting for the next trembling hand to lift its wand and whisper into the dark, "Lumos." And somewhere far away the castle stirred in its sleep, its old stones glowing faintly with the warmth of remembered fire. Winter returned to Hogwarts once more, wrapping the ancient castle in snow and silence. Icicles hung from the battlements like frozen spears, and the lake lay still beneath its glassy crust. The wind swept through the towers, carrying with it the familiar sense of pine, parchment, and smoke. To every student within those walls, it felt as though the castle itself exhaled warmth, guarding them from the chill of the world beyond. Years had passed since Evan Tallow had last crossed the threshold of Gryffindor Tower, yet his name lingered like an echo. Some said he had vanished into the north to serve the ministry. Others whispered that he had joined Dumbledore. But among the portraits, among the ghosts and the old stones that remembered everything, his story endured. Not as a legend of power, but as a lesson in courage. Now another winter brought new faces to the old rooms. Among them was a boy named Corin Vale, tall, sharp-eyed, and quick with both word and wand. He bore the air of one who did not quite belong, though he hid it behind a mask of bravado. The sorting hat had barely touched his head before shouting, "Gryffindor?" Yet he felt no triumph. He did not think himself brave. He spent his evenings alone, sitting by the fire as Evan once had, watching the flames flicker and whisper in their golden tongues. The others spoke of Quidditch and mischief, of secret duels and charms, but Corin listened only to the quiet hiss of the hearth. It seemed to speak to him, softly at first, then clearer as nights passed. One evening, when snow pressed thick against the windows and the tower had grown still, he heard it again, a voice woven into the crackle of the flames. "Do you know what burns beneath these stones?" He started looking around, but the room was empty save for the portraits, whose eyes watched with ancient patience. The voice came again, low and steady. "You sit as another once did, lonely, doubting, yet the flame remembers." Corin's breath caught. "Who's there?" "An old friend," the voice said, "one who kept the fire when all else dimmed." A shape began to form within the hearth. Not a face, but the outline of a figure, cast entirely in light. The flames did not consume it. They seemed to bend toward it, as though drawn by memory. Corin rose slowly. Are you real? As real as the courage in your heart, the figure answered. The castle remembers me as I remembered it. I am what remains of the Ember Heart, the fire of Gryffindor, passed from keeper to keeper. Corin's hands trembled. What do you want from me? The voice softened. Only to remind you of who you are. My family, they were Slytherins. They said I was weak. They said courage was nothing but recklessness dressed in pride. Then they never knew its meaning, said the voice. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is standing within it, choosing to move when all else stands still. The fire within this tower burns not for pride, but for those who believe themselves unworthy of it. The figure extended a hand of flame. Corin felt warmth spread through the room, not fierce or painful, but calm, steady, alive. Touch the fire, the voice said. He hesitated. The instinct to draw back warred with something deeper, a yearning he could not name. Slowly he reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the light, it flared, filling the room with a golden blaze. He saw visions, not of his own life, but of others. A boy kneeling before a mirror that whispered promises, another facing a lion of stone in the dark, a young man standing beside a child by a frozen stream, passing the flame to her with gentle hands. He gasped, "Who are they?" "The keepers," the voice said. "Those who carried the Ember Heart before you. Their courage built the path you now walk. And mine? Yours will guide another." The light faded. The fire returned to its normal glow, though its warmth lingered in his chest. He sat back, heart pounding. The common room was still empty, but it no longer felt lonely. That night he dreamed of the tower, of its stones whispering in unison, their words older than the castle itself. Let courage dwell where loneliness hides. When he woke, dawn had broken pale and cold over the mountains. He felt changed, though he could not have said how. The fire no longer seemed merely a hearth. It was a living thing, breathing beside him. In the weeks that followed, Corin found his place. He began to speak in class, to smile at those who once ignored him. When a first-year girl burst into tears after a failed spell, he knelt beside her and said quietly, "The light's still there." And when she did, when her wand sparked with a faint glow, he saw in her eyes the same wonder that had filled his own. Word spread that the Gryffindor fire burned brighter that winter than it had in years. Some said it was the storm outside, others that the warmth came from the heart of the castle itself. But the portraits knew better. They saw what others did not, the faint shimmer that lingered around the boy when he passed, the soft gold that flickered at his fingertips when he laughed. In the still hours of the night, when the common room was silent, the fire whispered once more. "Well done, Corin Vale." He smiled faintly. "Who are you really?" The flames flickered, and for a heartbeat he thought he saw a face. A young man with steady eyes and the trace of a familiar smile. "Only the echo of one who kept the fire before you," the voice said. "My name was Evan Tallow. Remember it not for what I did, but for what you must continue." "Continue what?" "The keeping," Evan said. "For the Ember Heart is not a relic. It is a promise that courage shall never die within these walls. When the time comes, you will pass it on." The fire dimmed, and the voice was gone. Corin sat long after, watching the embers fade to gold. He did not feel fear or doubt now, only quiet understanding. The flame was not his alone to hold. It belonged to all who would face their fear and rise. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the world in silence. But within the tower, the fire burned bright, casting its steady glow upon the banners of red and gold. And somewhere deep beneath the castle, the old ember heart pulsed once more, slow, strong, eternal, as if nodding in approval. Another keeper had been chosen, another story had begun, and though centuries would pass and names would fade into legend, the fire would remain, a living thread through time, whispering to each lonely soul who sought it in the dark. You are seen, you are brave. So the circle continued, unbroken as flame, bound forever to the heart of Gryffindor Tower, where light would always find the lost, and courage would never be forgotten. The winter that had settled over Hogwarts was long and deep. Snow cloaked the towers and courtyards, muffling every footstep, and the lake froze in a sheet of glass that mirrored the silvered sky. The castle's windows glowed faintly against the dark, their lights a promise that warmth endured, even in the heart of winter. In the Gryffindor common room, the fire burned higher than ever. It was not an ordinary flame. It had a hue of gold that deepened when the wind howled through the tower and softened when laughter filled the room. Some said the fire had grown restless since Christmas. Others swore it whispered at night, though none could ever catch the words. Corin Vale, now in his 3rd year, knew the truth. The ember heart still pulsed beneath the castle, old and patient, and the fire in the tower was its voice. He had learned to listen, not with his ears, but with something deeper. It spoke not in words, but in warmth, in flickers of light that moved like thought, and when he listened well, he felt the presence of those who had come before, the courage of Evan Tallow, the sorrow of Alden Caro, the steady strength of Godric himself. But peace, as ever at Hogwarts, was never a thing that lasted long. It began one evening in February, when the castle trembled. The sound came like distant thunder. Though the skies were clear, dust drifted from the ceilings, and the portraits along the staircases cried out in alarm. In the great hall, the candles guttered, even the enchanted ceiling dimmed, its stars flickering as though the heavens themselves held their breath. Professor McGonagall rose at once, her eyes sharp. "To your dormitories, prefects, guide your houses. No one is to wander." Corin obeyed, but the fire in his chest stirred. When he reached the common room, the hearth flared violently, sending sparks spiraling toward the ceiling. The other students shrank back, but Corin stepped closer. "Tell me," he whispered. "What is it?" The flames bent toward him. For a heartbeat, they formed the shape of a lion's head, mane of fire, eyes of molten gold. When it spoke, the voice was not one, but many. "The heart below is breaking." He staggered back. "Breaking? Why?" The fire flickered wildly, casting long shadows across the room. Darkness seeks it. Fear feeds on what was forged in courage. Corin's pulse raced. He knew what it meant. The ember heart, the living flame, beneath the tower, was under attack. He turned toward the stairs. "I have to go." One of his friends, a girl named Morel, grabbed his arm. "Are you mad?" The professor said. He shook his head. "I have to go. It's calling me." Without waiting for an answer, he darted out through the portrait hole. The corridors were dim, lit only by the faint glow of torches that flickered uncertainly as he passed. The castle groaned around him, old, alive, and afraid. He ran, down staircases that moved beneath his feet, through hallways that twisted in the dark, until he reached the corridor behind the old tapestry of the roaring lions. The air there was warm and heavy, the stones beneath his boots trembling faintly. "Let courage dwell where loneliness hides," he whispered. The words Evan had once spoken, words that had become the tower's secret key. The tapestry shimmered and drew aside, revealing the narrow stair that led into the depths. The air grew hotter as he descended, carrying the scent of smoke and stone. The light from his wand bent strangely, as though the shadows themselves resisted it. When he reached the bottom, he found the old chamber, the place Evan had stood before him. Only now it was filled with a terrible glow. The ember heart, once its light throbbed against the walls, and within it, dark tendrils coiled like smoke, a presence that pulsed with hunger. Corin felt it before he saw it, the fear, ancient and heavy, pressing into his thoughts like claws. His wand hand shook. "You do not belong here," the darkness whispered. It had no face, no form, only the echo of every doubt he had ever known. "You are a child, pretending to be brave. Leave before you break, as the others did." He gritted his teeth. "No." The shadows writhed. "You think courage is light? It is pain. Fire burns even those who guard it." The ember heart flared, as if struggling. Its gold light wavered, swallowed by the dark. Corin dropped to one knee, shielding his face from the heat. He felt the memory of all who had come before him. Evan, Alden, the countless keepers, their hopes, their failures, their fire. And then he understood. The ember heart was not his to protect. It was his to join. It had never needed strength, only belief. He rose, lowering his wand. "You're right," he said quietly. "Courage burns, but it also warms, and I will not let you turn it to ash." He stepped forward directly into the heart of the light. The heat seared through him, not pain but truth, raw and unyielding. For an instant he saw everything, the founding of the castle, the fire that had first lit its halls, the long chain of souls who had carried its flame through centuries of darkness. He saw Evan's face, calm and proud. "The keeping never ends," the memory said. "Be the next light." Corin drew in a breath and whispered, "I am not afraid." The ember heart blazed. The shadows screamed, a sound like shattering glass, and then dissolved, scattered by the surge of golden fire that filled the chamber. When the light faded, silence fell. The ember heart burned once more, calm, steady, eternal. Its warmth filled the air, and in its glow Corin stood unharmed. His robes were singed, his heart pounding, but the fear was gone. "Rest now, you're safe." A voice, gentle and ancient, answered from the walls themselves. "Well done, keeper." When Corin returned to the tower, dawn had begun to touch the mountains. The fire in the hearth greeted him with a quiet roar, and the room, though empty, seemed to breathe again. He sank into the armchair nearest the blaze, exhaustion settling over him. Outside, the snow had stopped. The first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, striking the lake until it shimmered like gold. No one else at Hogwarts knew what had happened that night. By morning, the castle stood still and strong once more. The tremors ceased. The warmth returned. The only sign of change was a faint glow that now lived in the heart of every torch and candle. A whisper of the ember heart's victory. Corin never spoke of the battle beneath the tower, but in years to come, when students gathered by the fire to whisper tales, they would say that on the coldest nights, the flames burned brighter, They would say that the spirit of the Ember Heart watched over them, carried in the courage of those who dared to believe. And if one listened very closely, past the crackle and sigh of the fire, they might hear a voice, soft as breath, speaking words older than time itself. Let courage dwell where loneliness hides. So it had been in the beginning, so it would be until the end, and the fire, eternal, patient living.